Dobar dan, dobrodošli na posljednji panel na ovom To Be Secure forumu. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the last panel of this To Be Secure forum, Montenegro. For the next half hour, we will talk about the climate energy security nexus. And we have two panelists. Thomas O'Donnell, energy and geopolitical expert, is here with us. And joining us online is Ellen Riley, non-resident senior fellow, professor, City Law School, Global Energy Center, Atlantic Council. Mr. Riley, hello.
Hi.
We can see and hear you, so welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's nice to have you here on To Be Secure Forum Montenegro. Let me set the scene. Cooking dinner, heating homes, generating electricity, running factories in Europe. For years, this was done in large part with Russian natural gas. Now, the continent is trying to find alternative sources while it's dealing with record high energy prices. And the winter is coming. In the meantime, investigation is underway, suspecting gross sabotage of the damage of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines in 4 locations in international waters in the Baltic Sea. And the scientists fear that the amount of methane released, an equivalent to a third of Denmark's annual CO2 emissions, could be one of the worst natural gas leaks ever and pose a significant climate risks. Now, we are talking about the climate energy security nexus, and I will ask Mr. O'Donnell, with all the current information, they are indicating that the Nord Stream damage is a result of a sabotage. Now, the leaks from the Nord Stream pipelines also cause significant environmental damage, as I mentioned. So, as the new European architecture unfolds, is the infrastructure becoming a sitting duck?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to this very interesting conference. I think when we talk about Nord Stream, we just have to quickly put everything in context.
Okay.
Of course, we know there's a real, hot war in Ukraine, but we have to just be very clear. In parallel, there's another front of this war, and the other front of this war is an energy and economic war against Europe, and it's mainly energy. And Russia has significant leverage over Europe, both on oil and gas, but especially on gas in the short term. And so, in that context, these pipelines get blown up. So, I would say, let me say this. First, as to why would they be blown up and how they fit in this war, I just want to remind everybody that we'll look at it this way. It's clear that within a certain number of years, 2 to 6 years, all the gas that Russia supplies to Europe and to some other places can be totally replaced by gas from other parts of the world. We can talk about that. Also, in natural gas, the Russian Federation always made significantly less money on exporting natural gas than oil. 2, 3, 4 times as much money is made on oil. So, Putin knows he's going to lose this lever, so he may as well use it before he loses it. And that's what he's doing. And it's also the one lever that has the most impact in Europe because the gas is delivered by pipeline, and it's very difficult to replace it. Oil is delivered by ships, so it can come from other places. So the problem is it has to come from LNG, and that's going to take a considerable part of time. But why attack Nord Stream? Mm-hmm. And I would say this. So Putin has been playing, as I said, use it before you lose it. He's been turning the gas up and down and then finally off in some pipelines to put Europe in the most vulnerable position possible before the start of the winter heating season. Okay, and the whole hope is to divide Europe amongst its inside countries and between countries, so solidarity goes away with Ukraine. That's seriously his hope. Now, he stopped Nord Stream 2. The problem with stopping Nord Stream 1, is that if you don't have some legal excuse for force majeure, already probably, I talked to a former CEO of a gas company, and he told me probably it could be like $10 billion already of liability from Gazprom for non-delivery of the gas. So first they tried this excuse of rubles. That didn't really work. Then only to some extent. Then they tried this excuse of compressors. I won't go through it all, but it's clear, the Chancellor of Germany stood in front of the compressor. Here it is, come and get it, you can have it, which was a good tactic, and they don't come to have it. So what happens, now the pipeline itself has been blown up. But now what happens, if you talk to people in the gas sector, it seems overwhelming. They will say that, aha, now they have a real force majeure. They physically cannot send the gas. So they will undoubtedly be brought, Alan is I defer to him on this in more detail. He's the competition lawyer on energy. He understands these things. There'll undoubtedly be all these companies, some of which are going bankrupt in Europe, who had long-term contracts to deliver gas, are going bankrupt, losing lots of money. And they will sue. They will undoubtedly win. And Gazprom's not going to pay 10, maybe in another year or so, it could be 30 or 40 billion dollars. They can't or won't pay this, and eventually there's liens on all the Gazprom property in Europe, pipelines, refineries, storage facilities, maybe even ships, and they could lose it all.
Yeah.
And so that's that explanation for that, I think. And,
okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Riley, before Russia used to typically supply about 40% of Europe's natural gas, mostly by pipelines. What are the alternatives found so far for Europe regarding pipelines, LNGs?
Well, one of the things which I think is important to realize is that simply by having much higher gas prices, that has created much more demand, supply, which is available from other parts of the world. So as prices have risen, much more liquid natural gas has entered the European markets. That's one of the supplies. One of the other effects, for example, in the United Kingdom, is that UK gas production in the North Sea is up by 1/3, and that's largely because the dormant gas fields, which were more expensive to use, now are economic. So there are a number of factors like this which are increasing the amount of gas that's available coming into the European market. Equally, Norway has increased production. So we are seeing a significant part of the gas gap created by Gazprom being replaced by some domestic production increases within Europe and more imports. It's interesting to note that now Norway is Europe's largest supplier of gas. Another factor, I think, which is not recognized as much, but is very significant, is the role of China. Essentially, because the Chinese economy is slowing, more gas is being deposited in Europe. So essentially, the point to realize is that China is the largest importer of liquid natural gas, but it has very little storage. So if it doesn't use it, it's got to dump it, and the dumping ground is Europe. So this is helping us as well. And if you look at the projections, the state of the Chinese economy, they are not good. So we may be able to get through this winter in part through a lot of liquid natural gas entering European markets. A lot of it originally was supposed to be used in China.
Mr. Riley, how important is the Greece-Bulgaria interconnector? Recently it was put into function.
Yeah, well, this will help because the other element of this is there's the Greek LNG terminal which has come on stream. Which already exists, and there is a second LNG terminal coming on stream the end of this year, early next year. So there is more capacity to bring LNG on board and into southeastern Europe. There's also the expansion of the LNG terminal in Kirk, which is planned. So there is, because the point to realize, and this is the other point which is, I think, really important, is that we are in a relatively positive situation in Europe as a whole, despite all the panicky headlines, because of the scale of storage.
It is surprising to hear this. We are in a positive situation because all we hear are panic, panic, panic. The winter is coming. We will all freeze.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No, we're not going to freeze.
Yeah.
The position is that we're about 85 to 90% full. Storage is full. That means that Europe could probably survive with no gas for around 2 months. Okay, that's on average, but you see the point. Now, the point is now on top of that, there is higher prices bringing more gas into Europe generally, and the Chinese situation means that that will provide more gas into Europe. So we're probably okay for this winter, more or less. We'll have high prices, that's true, but we will have enough gas.
Are you stressing for this winter because after the winter we are not okay anymore?
Well, yes, because the problem is,
Yeah.
for next winter, the difficulty is that whilst we had about 6 months of Russian gas coming in to refill European storages for this winter, if the war continues and if Putin remains in power, the likelihood is we are not going to have any Russian gas for next winter. So therefore, we have to look at what we're going to do for next winter. So it's winter 23, 24, and possibly 24, 25. I think after that, there will be so much gas coming in. There will be additional capacity from the likes of Qatar and the United States that should make a significant difference. So the question is what do we do between now and the winter 25, 26?
Mr. O'Donnell, how do you see this situation? What should the world, the Europe do?
Well, I'd like to be more optimistic, but I think it's important that the governments in Europe and the European Union warn the citizens that, you know, this is a war and there's going to be casualties. Already, say in Germany, I came from Germany, zinc and aluminum smelters have shut down. A lot of businesses have cut back on production. Many energy-intensive ones are looking to move to Louisiana. We can expect our gas bills, if you paid about $1,500 on average, you'll probably pay $4,500 a house this winter. And demand reduction is absolutely necessary. The storage can last 2.5 months. That's against a complete shutoff of Russian gas. And then it's a severe problem. The problem in Norway, I've been talking a lot to people who work there, Norway has a drought. And they have a severe shortage of electricity. They might have to stop
Is the same in this region? We had a horrible hydrological season.
Yes. And I don't want to go into all the details, but because of some renewable ideas, they gave in and decided they're going to use renewables to pump the gas. So they might have a problem with a lot of things.
In our preparation to this panel, you said that this crisis began well before the war in Ukraine, resulting from unrealistic renewable ambitions of the EU.
Yes. I think, I mean, to put it bluntly, I think a kind of renewables populism had captured Brussels. That's represented by the Green Party, especially in Germany, but other ones. It's not just the Germans, but they particularly. And the problem is, if you look at the winter of 2020, 2021, it was extremely cold and the wind didn't blow. We have overdependence on wind, and the Greens, but others who've all gotten on board now, this idea. Everybody has always said for 30 years, if you have renewables such as wind and solar, you need grid-scale storage. There simply is no grid-scale storage. When the wind stops, it's a matter of hours, right? So what is grid-scale storage? De facto, it's natural gas, putting in small-scale natural gas generation to make up for it, and that's precisely where we have our problem. So if the wind doesn't blow, in that year, 2020, 2021, storage went down almost to nothing, and that's when Putin started playing this game for the next year of not supplying storage. But the next winter, 2021, 2022, we were just lucky it was mild. So it depends on the winter, but even if it's a pretty mild winter, it's, you know, there'll be companies that shut and there'll be layoffs. There's companies already going bankrupt, and how the European Union, with various dysfunctions and functionality, how they will handle these things, whether citizens will feel it's fair, it's shared fairly in companies, that's going to be vital. But I think the other thing about how, Qatar and the USA are the main source of new LNG. It'll be another year before an increment in LNG, with all things going well, in the United States, and then it'll be maybe 4 years before it comes up another 40%. Qatar's major expansion won't hit the market for at least 2 more years, and then it'll take another year or 2.
So we have a gap.
So it'll be more than 2. It'll be almost 6 years, according to the head of Citibank Commodities, who's very experienced in this. It could be 6 or more years before the price of gas in Europe equalizes to that in the United States because of the shortage of export, no matter how many terminals we have to bring it in.
Yeah. Mr. O'Donnell, Mr. O'Reilly, I'm sorry. Mr. O'Reilly, Germany is keeping the option of reactivating 2 out of the 3 remaining nuclear power plants, earlier planned to be phased out by the end of this year. Is ignoring what happened in Fukushima and returning to nuclear energy something that is being considered in the EU?
I think part of the trouble at the moment is there's a lack of sense that we may not be actually in a military war, but we are in economic war with the Russian Federation. And the difficulty here, I think, is to not recognize that there is an urgency of now. There's an urgency to act. There's an urgency to take steps to protect the European economy and European society. In those circumstances, we should be looking at using every single type of energy resource to reduce our reliance on natural gas. And if that means using 2 or 3 nuclear power stations, which are currently standing idle, we should do so. And that also applies to not just Germany, but the UK. The UK has just closed a perfectly functioning nuclear power station, which originally came into operation in 1976. It could certainly be run safely for another couple of years, and we should really be doing that.
The EU also has its goals and timelines to reduce coal consumption. Is that something that is also changing?
Well, I think some member states are using more coal-fired power stations, and frankly, in the circumstances, we are in an economic war, and we need to, or hybrid war perhaps, we should be using whatever resources we have to provide energy to our population and to our industries. And as I say, the other thing which Professor O'Donnell mentioned was the issue of demand reductions, and clearly we need to do that as well. And one of the issues here is to look at we have both an urgency of now, which is to act now to reduce our reliance on Russian gas, and we have potentially 3 or 4 more years where we're going to have significant energy resource constraints. And in those circumstances, we should also be looking at a much, much greater energy efficiency, energy reduction, insulation strategy, because that will work to also significantly reduce usage.
Mr. Riley, where does climate come into this equation? Does it come into equation at all, the climate, at this moment in time? Because we are talking about the climate energy security nexus, and the NATO has its climate change and security impact assessment, which stated that the climate change is an overreaching challenge of our time that will measurably increase the risks to security and worsen as the world warms further. So it's stating the obvious, but are the measures to be taken also obvious in this complicated moment in time?
I come back on this, because the point about that is this, that, well, obviously I was talking about using a lot of, there's an urgency of now.
Yeah.
But within that strategy, you can see what you can potentially do, is that if we roll out over the next 3 or 4 years a very significant demand reduction strategy, which involves a lot of energy efficiency measures, and to really take this seriously, we can have an impact in the medium term, which is valuable because the problem is going to last for several years. And the effect of that in the long run is to reduce our use of energy, period, which has a positive climate change impact. So in fact, we could end up, to take a positive in this, if we really commit to doing this and execute so that we roll out very strong demand reduction measures, we could end up in a situation that despite using some more coal and gas from other sources, we could end up in a situation where overall we actually created a better trend for CO2 reduction going forward. So that's one of the ways that we can actually make this work. Mr.
O'Donnell, how do you see the situation?
I'd like to, I completely support what Alan is saying, Dr. Riley. I think it's important, Germany in particular, but Europe has an ideological problem. This idea that 100% renewables and no fossil fuels and no nuclear can possibly work is simply wrong. It was a big mistake, and I won't go into all the details, but you need to revolutionize, quote unquote, the entire transmission and distribution grid. The people who advocate this policy say that, and they say, oh, but it's positive, because with this will come the fourth industrial revolution, and so forth. You need to have grid-scale storage. We've been talking about that for how long? 94% of the grid-scale storage in the world is pumped hydro. And from Paris to Moscow is what the military people call the Great Northern Plain. It's just not going to happen. Maybe in Macedonia they can do some things like that. And it's extremely expensive. Germany has more money and technology, good engineers, and dedication to this program than probably any other country, and they haven't met their targets. They've destroyed so far 14 nuclear power plants that could have run for decades more, and the minister, who's from the Green Party of Energy and Environment, who we rely on now, is very important in Brussels in this crisis, said in July, this is not an electricity crisis, it's a natural gas crisis, which is, of course, the high price of electricity is due to the coupling with the price of gas when it's burned. And it's completely wrong, and he used that as an excuse to turn off the rest of the nuclear power plants. It's not just 3. The 3 that were turned off last year could be brought online, and it's particularly rich, I would say, when Chancellor Scholz goes to Norway, stands next to the Norwegian Prime Minister, who said, I'm sorry, we have a drought, we might not be able to send electricity to you this year, and if you want to develop, we can significantly increase our natural gas. We need a 20-year investment. We have to build pipelines and drill.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, that's against the German plans, and in 10 years everything is going to be not carbonized. And so they won't make, so there's this hang-up right now in Germany to make contracts with the Qataris and others, long-term contracts, for more than 10 years. Oh, don't worry. Make a contract and promise you're going to turn it into hydrogen. And these people are just not going to wink and say, yes, it's not going to work. So we need realization for base load in Europe, we need nuclear power. And the Mesmer plan in the 1980s in France, for security reasons mainly, built 56 nuclear power plants in about 15 years. So I keep chiding on Twitter Kadri Simpson, our commissioner.
Yeah.
Why don't we have the Simpson plan? We need 300 nuclear power plants in the next 20 years. Generation 3 plus has been proven
One
now.
Fukushima happens and then...
No. Let's be realistic here. Look at Fukushima and what happened. And now the German cabinet decided within 48 hours to kill all those nuclear power plants. You know what the people in Poland are going through to try and build 6, and they killed so many? 48 hours, they didn't have any idea what happened in Fukushima. And what happened in Fukushima had nothing to do with the nuclear technology. It was the biggest tsunami in history that overflowed the plant.
Yeah.
And it was a minor matter that caused the shut off of the electricity to the cooling. I happen to be a nuclear physicist, so I could go on about this, okay? Anyway, that's not the problem.
It was not the correct argument.
No,
She said no to nuclear.
No, it was
nuclear
opportunist
energy.
because Merkel wanted to win a campaign where the Greens were challenging her in one
Now again,
state,
politics is
and she
interfering.
said, no, we're going to do this, and they lost it anyways. The Greens have had it since then.
Yeah. Mr. Riley, the continued increase in sanctions on Russian energy also comes into the equation. Now, with Putin planning some more moves or trying to escalate the war even more with this mobilization and annexation of new territories and so on, the EU is constantly, and the US, thinking about new sanctions. President Zelensky is also calling for stronger sanctions to Russia. How could this affect this whole energy situation in Europe in the, well, months and years to come?
Well, I think you've got to look at oil and gas slightly differently. I mean, it would be relatively easy to create a sanctions regime for Russian gas. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is that almost all of the gas which arrives in Europe from Russia comes in via pipelines. Only a very small amount comes through LNG, and they can't really expand it. And none of the pipelines, the gas fields of Western Siberia, which feed Europe, have a connection to China. So it would be relatively easy to impose a control regime. You could have impose a fixed price, have a single European buyer, and you could potentially auction that gas into the European market. You could even provide that the gas would have to be delivered via the Ukrainian transit system if you wanted to. I mean, you can do that. They've got no other way of bringing their gas, selling their gas. In addition to which, at the moment, the Russians are actually providing very little gas to Europe. I mean, Yamal is empty, the pipeline running from Belarus through Poland. Nord Stream 1 is flooded with water. Nord Stream 2 is partially flooded with water and in other way, otherwise not operational. The Ukrainian transit is receiving about 42 million cubic meters a day of gas. And to give you some idea of how small that is, Moldova, both left and right bank Moldova, in total uses just 20 million cubic meters a day in winter. So basically, it's a day's supply of Moldova plus 2. That's all that's going through the Ukrainian transit system. And the other pipeline, which is running at anything like full capacity, is Turkish Stream 2, providing gas into Serbia and then on to Hungary. And we have to ask how long that's going to run, because we've already seen Russian murmurings about the fact it is affected by sanctions. So given the fact there is so little gas coming through through the different pipeline networks, we can impose a regime on the Russian system because it's not actually having much impact on the supply of gas to Europe anyhow. So we can do that. Oil is much more is in many ways more difficult. It is fungible in theory. It's easily sellable anywhere around the world. The difficulty is that almost all of the tankers are controlled by EU and US companies and UK companies, and all the insurance is UK-US. So essentially, we can control the flow. The other problem for the Russians is that almost all Russian oil flows through the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. So again, it's relatively easily controlled. I mean, the Baltic Sea is about to become a NATO lake anyhow. And the Black Sea, it can only come through the straits and into sea lanes controlled by NATO partners.
So it's an open road for the EU if it wants to achieve that. Mr. O'Donnell, just for the end, for the last 2 minutes, do you want to add something to this topic?
You want to add something? Well, there's quite a few things. One, I want to emphasize that I think what's very important for European leaders, it's not just a matter of, they're trying to insulate the population from the impact of the price.
Yes.
What we learned in the United States is the high price of gasoline actually dramatically decreased consumption. So it's generally wrong to insulate the population from feeling the high price. What you can do, if you have a sophisticated government that knows how much money people make in households, is then you can subsidize. When you give the people the money, they can still have the incentive to try and decrease. But it might get so bad that we have to ration in any case. So that's one thing. There's these ideas of capping the price of gas. Europe doesn't control the entire market worldwide, and Asia is the other place that's really needed. So you have to outbid the Asians to get it. And so it's not so simple. But now there's other more complicated ideas of how to do that. I'm a little skeptical that will work. They probably will adopt something. On the front of oil, the European Union has sanctions kicking in December 5th that will stop all imports of seaborne oil. The Germans and Poles have promised not to take any more from the Druzhba pipeline, which is the main way it comes by pipeline to Europe. So that'll pretty much close everything down. In February, the other sanctions kick in on refined products. Europe in the north used to take almost 2.5 million barrels a day of diesel. So that will be cut off. So that's a dramatic change. That's a much bigger hit to Russia than anything with gas because of the value involved.
The money, yeah.
Now, as Alan said, that has to be transported by ships, and they're going to sanction the ships. The Biden administration and the Treasury Department, the White House, are very worried that there has to be enough oil on the market. Probably there will be a worldwide recession, and the price will go down to $70-something a barrel, and what OPEC just did doesn't really matter. But they're not taking a chance. And so there's ideas of if the Russians continue, they can continue distributing it if there's a cap on the world. We'll see if that works. But they're working very hard to get more oil on the market no matter what. And that's another discussion.
Well, listening to you, Mr. O'Donnell, and to you, Mr. Riley, maybe next year on To Be Secure Forum, we will all be online and saving our guests for coming to here and flying and everything. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being a part of this panel and for being part of To Be Secure Forum. And you were our last panelist.
Last panelist.
So thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Yes.
Thanks, Alan.
I will invite Adnan, možda i nastaviti na lokalnim jezicima. Evo, završili smo.
Završili smo.
Jel ti mogu ponuditi samo malo statistike prije nego krenemo? 2 moderatora.
Dobro.
Dobar dan, ti i ja. 13 panela.
Odlično.
Ti i ja. 40 sugovornika i govornika.
Sjajno.
Od kojih predsjednici država i vlada, zamjenik čelnika NATO-a, posebni izaslanici Europske unije, ministri obrane, ministri vanjskih poslova, geopolitički, sigurnosni, energetski, mnogi drugi stručnjaci. Dugačko je i samo nabrojati sve ovo. A kamoli okupiti ih na jednom mjestu i čuti stvarno bitne teme koje su otvorili.
O odličnim smo temama govorili, o teškim temama, važnim temama, u jednom posebno izazovnom vremenu, tako da sve ovo o čemu ti govoriš, Jasmina, nekako imalo punog smisla. Napunili smo naslovnice portala i novina. Sve su domaće televizije i regionalne televizije i malo šire od regije, barem u prvih 5 minuta imale vijesti koje su govorile o našem forumu i šta se na našem forumu dešavalo.
Dakle, dešavalo se
svašta. Dešavalo se svašta. Bilo je važno